A little girl walked into a billionaire CEO's office and said, "My mom is sick, so I came instead." What the CEO did next changed their lives forever. But that's not all, because the step he took for this little girl will leave you completely shocked. Before we dive into this emotional story, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss another life-changing story. Monday mornings at Kincaid Tower were a choreography. Mason Kincaid could set his watch to, elevator doors sighing open at 7:55, the first espresso at 8 o'clock, a parade of reports and people who never arrived unprepared. His corner office on the 54th floor looked out over the Sound, ferry boats threading the water like needles in blue cloth. Walnut desk, steel and glass, a room calibrated for certainty. So when the door clicked and a very small person in a Navy janitor's uniform stepped inside, the air shifted. She couldn't have been more than 5. Golden curls had escaped 2 lopsided pigtails. The uniform hung on her like a borrowed shadow, sleeves rolled 3 times, pant cuffs cinched with a shoelace. In one hand she held a miniature spray bottle. In the other, a carefully folded rag. Her sneakers were scuffed pink and determined. "Excuse me, sir," she said, voice careful and bright. "I came to work for my mommy today. She's sick and had to go to the hospital." Mason's hand paused above a stack of acquisition briefs. For half a second he wondered if this was a prank, some tone-deaf team-building stunt. Then he met her eyes, clear, steady, unswerving, and knew it wasn't. "What's your name?" he asked, standing so he wasn't towering behind the desk. "Lila," she said with a small nod. "My mommy is Carmen. She cleans here at night. She's the best at it." Pride squared her tiny shoulders. "She couldn't sit up this morning. She said the room was spinning. So I came instead so she wouldn't get in trouble." The words were simple. Their weight was not. "How did you get here, Lila?" Mason asked, gentling his tone as if he were approaching a bird. She looked down at her shoes. "The bus. Mommy showed me the stops. I put quarters from my piggy bank in a Ziploc. I remembered your building because it's the shiny one with the big K." She tilted her head toward the window. "And the water." The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Kincaid, your CFO is here for the 8:30. "Clear my morning," Mason said, eyes never leaving Lila. "Everything." A beat of stunned silence. "All of it, sir. All of it." He rounded the desk, kept a respectful distance, and crouched to her height. "Are you hungry?" She considered, then asked as if negotiating terms. "Do you have apple juice?" "I might." He opened the small refrigerator hidden behind a wood panel and, miraculously, pulled out a bottle his assistant kept for visiting clients' kids. He twisted off the cap and handed it over. Lila took it with both hands. "Thank you," she said, sincere as a pledge, and crossed to the window bench. Her legs swung, not quite reaching the edge. The city sprawled below them in squares of light and motion, and she looked so small against it that something in Mason's chest went off its axis. He had steered billion-dollar mergers that required Iceman nerves and a taste for risk. But none of that training applied to a 5-year-old who had ridden a city bus alone to save her mother's job. He sat beside the desk, not behind it, as if proximity might lower the temperature of the room. "Tell me about your mom," he said. "She's brave," Lila answered without hesitation. "She makes grilled cheese the good way, with the crispy sides. She ticked off items on her fingers. She reads me 2 stories even if she's very tired. She says when you take care of something big, you have to remember the little things, too." Lila took a mammoth sip. "She always remembers the little things." Mason felt an old, unused part of himself nod. Remember the little things. The phrase landed like a key in a lock he hadn't known was there. "Does she know you came?" he asked. "I left a note on the table." Lila's eyes went shiny for a second and then cleared. "Our neighbor, Miss June, called the ambulance. They took Mommy. Miss June said I was very helpful. I packed my rag and spray and my quarters. She lifted the folded cloth as evidence. I know where to start. Where to start, he echoed, already knowing he was about to let a stranger redraw his day. Your desk, she said with the solemnity of a surgeon. Mommy says the big boss should have a clean start so he doesn't forget the small people. She told me not to use too much spray on wood. Lila hopped down, fished a travel tissue from the pocket of her oversized uniform, and laid it flat on her palm like she'd seen Carmen do. I can do circles, she added, proud. Mason let out a breath that was almost a laugh and stepped back. All right, he said. Circles it is. She approached the desk like a ritual, pressed the tissue to the polished surface, and drew slow, careful spirals. Her technique wouldn't impress facilities, but her focus would have made any COO weep. She stretched on tiptoe to reach a corner near his laptop, jaw set in concentration. Lila, Mason said softly, you don't have to. A glass of water he'd abandoned an hour earlier rocked, wobbled, and tipped. The sound was small, crystalline. A clear sheet skated across the desk and made for a folder of projections like a river finding downhill. Lila froze. Her eyes leapt to his face, round with horror. I'm sorry, she whispered, hands lifted as if to prove she would not touch another thing. Please don't fire my mommy. I was trying to help. It's okay, Mason said, moving before panic could root. He caught the folder with one hand, snagged a sleeve of napkins with the other, and made a dam. A thin waterfall licked the edge of the desk and fell harmlessly to the rug. He handed her a napkin. Here. Team effort. She blinked. Team. Team, he confirmed, dabbing away the last shining beads. You didn't ruin anything. You were doing your best. That matters more in this office than you think. She breathed again, a small, hiccuping sound. I'm supposed to do things right even if nobody sees, she said, repeating a rule learned by heart. I see, Mason said, and realized he meant it. The crisis passed, Lila squared her shoulders and resumed her circles with renewed care, this time giving the water glass a suspicious berth, as if it might misbehave again. Mason leaned against the credenza, arms folded, and watched a different kind of meeting unfold, a child keeping a promise to her mother with a tissue and a ragged courage that made the room feel unfamiliar in the best way. Is it hard being the CEO? She asked after a minute, not looking up. Some days, he said. It's big. Lots of, moving pieces. She nodded. Mommy says big things are just a bunch of little things holding hands. He almost smiled. Your mom sounds very smart. She used to do computers, Lila said, lowering her voice for reasons he didn't understand. Then I came. She says I'm the best thing she ever made. Mason's phone lit twice, 3 times, demanding the shape his day should have taken. He flipped it face down. Would it be okay, he asked, if I called the hospital to check on her? Just to make sure someone's with her. Lila's grip tightened on the tissue. Trust was a delicate instrument. Miss June is there, she said finally. But you can call. I want her to have apple juice, too. I'll make sure she gets it, he said, already reaching for his desk phone, already hearing his own voice saying words it did not often say, take your time, do this first, the market can wait. As the line rang, Lila pressed the tissue to a faint streak of light and followed it until the wood showed only itself again. The morning sun fell across the glass and the girl and the man who, 5 minutes earlier, had been too busy to notice the weather. Somewhere far below, a ferry pulled away from the dock. Somewhere across town, a monitor beeped in a steady pattern. In Mason's office, a new rhythm began, small circles, little things, a cup of apple juice, the first unplanned pause in a life built on plans. He didn't know the whole of it yet, the neighbor named June, the winter cough that wouldn't let go, the personal history tucked between Carmen's ribs like a badly healed fracture. He only knew that a 5-year-old had walked through security, ridden an elevator, and asked for nothing but a chance to keep her mother's world from slipping. Mason lifted the phone to his ear, looked at the tiny worker in sleeves too long, and thought, not for the first time that morning, this is not random. It was the beginning. The line to the hospital rang twice before a human voice took it. St. Catherine's admitting. Mason turned slightly away from Lila so she couldn't read his face and kept his tone even. I'm calling to check on a patient, Carmen Alvarez. Brought in this morning. A pause, keys tapping. Alvarez, yes. She's in observation, respiratory and chest pain. Stable. Visiting hours are open until 8. Does she have anyone with her? Mason asked. Neighbor listed, June Barker. She signed in about an hour ago. Thank you, he said. Could you do me a favor? Send a note to her nurse that her employer has her on fully paid medical leave. No need to worry about work. Another pause, softer this time. I'll pass it along. He hung up and set the phone down as if it weighed more than it should. Lila had stopped circling and was watching him with the wary focus of a kid who's learned to read weather in adult faces. Is mommy okay? She asked. She's being taken care of, he said, honest without being frightening. She's stable. And, this part is important, she won't get in trouble at work for being sick. Lila's shoulders dropped a fraction. Good. The intercom buzzed again, apologetic. Mr. Kincaid, Chief of Security is asking if you have a minute. Mason pressed the button. Send Raina in. A woman in a tailored jacket and flat shoes that could run entered with a tablet tucked under her arm. Raina had built the company's security hardware and culture from scratch, nothing much rattled her. The small person by the window gave her a run for it. Raina took in Lila's uniform, the spray bottle, Mason's loosened tie. Sir. This is Lila, Mason said. Carmen Alvarez's daughter. Carmen works night shift on facilities. Lila came in when her mom was taken to the hospital. Raina's eyes softened. Hi, Lila. Then, to Mason, we did not catch her at the turnstiles. She took the bus and followed the crowd, Lila supplied helpfully. I stayed close like mommy says in the grocery store. Raina crouched a moment so her badge was less of a wall. You're very brave. And very lucky. This building is a maze. She looked back to Mason. I'll review the camera path and talk to concierge. We'll fix the human parts without turning the place into an airport. Good, Mason said. And please put a visitor badge on her. She's with me today. Raina unclipped a tiny spare badge from her tablet case, bright yellow, the kind they kept for tours, and looped the lanyard over Lila's neck. Official, she said, tapping the badge. You stick with Mr. Kincaid. If you need anything, I'm on this floor. When Raina left, Mason called 2 more people, Omar Patel, Director of Facilities, and then HR. Omar, Mason said when the line clicked. Carmen Alvarez is in observation at St. Catherine's. She's on paid medical leave until cleared. Shift coverage is your problem, not hers. Understood, Omar said immediately. In the background Mason could hear a floor buffer humming. She's one of our best. I'll send flowers. And a meal card. Do it, Mason said, then patched HR, Mark Alvarez, Carmen, paid leave, 0 penalty. Also, hazard pay retroactive for night crews last month. And build me a hardship fund application that doesn't make people beg. There was a stunned beat from HR, today. Today, Mason said. I'll sign the policy. He hung up and finally sat, not behind the desk but at the round meeting table near the window. All right, teammate, he said to Lila, trying the word on. 2 more missions. First, we're going to write a note to your mom so the nurse can read it to her. Then we're going to make sure you eat something that isn't apple juice. Lila slid onto the chair across from him, feet not quite touching the rung. Can we put a heart on the note? We can put 6, he said, tearing a sheet from his legal pad. He wrote in block letters and said the words out loud as he printed them, letting Lila hear the shape of comfort. Carmen, we've got you covered. Do not worry about work. Rest. Your daughter is safe and being spoiled. M. Kincaid. Can I add mine? Lila asked. He passed the pen. She gripped it too tightly and drew a heart so earnest it almost tipped off the page, then spelled, tongue between her teeth, I love you mommy, and underlined love 3 times. Perfect, he said, and meant it. He slid the note into an envelope and wrote for Nurse Carmen Alvarez on the front. Then he stood. Second mission, he said. Food. Lila blinked at the size of the executive floor kitchen, stainless counters, a barista-grade machine his assistant used like a Stradivarius. He opened the pantry and studied it like a puzzle. He could marshal capital across continents, but assembling a 5-year-old's breakfast without an assistant felt like defusing a bomb. Toast, he suggested. With peanut butter. Or plain. Plain, she said. And the crunchy apples, not the mushy ones. He found a pink lady in the fruit bowl, sliced it into tidy moons, and arranged them like a sun around 2 triangles of toast on a small plate. Lila watched, eyes brightening not at the food but at the fact of being seen. Hot chocolate, he risked. Half hot, half not, she said, solemn. So it doesn't burn your tongue. He mixed milk with a polite spoon of cocoa and slid it across the counter like a bartender serving the house special. She took a careful sip. This is good, she pronounced, surprised. You're not bad at this. Don't tell anyone, he said. I have a reputation. They ate at the window bench, the city tossing light at them in squares. Lila bit the apple crescents in perfect little arcs, making a pattern of missing moons on her plate. Do you have a mom? She asked suddenly, not looking up. Too much eye contact was a trap she'd learned to avoid with grown-ups. I did, Mason said. She liked ferry boats. She taught high school English and never met an adverb she trusted. What's an adverb? A word that tries too hard, he said, and she giggled, this small, fizzy sound that sanded an edge off the morning. He cleaned up badly, leaving a smear of peanut butter he didn't see until Lila, wordless, slid off the bench and wiped it with the rag, her circles getting smaller until the counter shone again. Little things, she said, not smug, just true. Mason's phone hummed on the table with the day he'd abandoned, CFO, legal, a ping from his sister who never texted before noon. He silenced it, then tapped a quick message to June Barker, the neighbor listed on the hospital chart. This is Mason Kincaid, Carmen's employer. Lila is safe with me at the office. I've arranged paid leave and will courier a note to Carmen's nurse. Please call me if you need a ride or anything at all. He added his direct number and hit send. He printed a temporary visitor sheet for a car service, addressed it to Street Catherine's observation desk, and tucked the envelope with their note inside. Field trip for paper, he told Lila. We're sending this to your mom. In the hallway, people pretended not to rubberneck. Executives who didn't stop for storms slowed for a child in an oversized uniform wearing a CEO's visitor badge like a medal. Mason matched Lila's pace, which turned out to be a series of small, decisive steps punctuated by wonder. They stopped at the facility's bullpen on 32. Omar stepped out from a cluster of carts smelling like lemon and effort. He had dark crescents under his eyes and a clean towel slung over one shoulder. Mr. Kincaid, he said, surprised, then spotted Lila and his face rearranged itself into something gentler. You must be Lila. Your mom teaches the new folks how to do edges. Edges? Lila echoed. Omar pointed at a glass partition. Most people wipe the middle. Your mom makes sure we don't forget the corners. That's where the fingerprints live. Lila absorbed this like an apprentice. Mason felt his throat pinch for a second. Paid leave? Omar confirmed, low. Cleared, Mason said. And a hardship fund. Tell your team. No one should be doing calculus between rent and antibiotics. Omar blinked, then nodded once. I'll spread it. Back upstairs, Mason handed the envelope to Raina with the car slip. Get this to St. Catherine's observation floor, he said. Today. Yes, sir. She glanced at Lila. Want me to add juice boxes to the care package? 2, Lila said, holding up the correct number of fingers just in case numbers were negotiable here. When they were alone again, Mason walked Lila to the glass wall that looked over the Sound. A ferry was pushing away from the dock, white wake cutting AV through the blue. My mom used to say the ferry turned the water into handwriting, he said without planning to. Like it was signing its name. What did it write? Lila asked, pressing her nose to the glass. Different things, he said. Depends who's reading. She considered this with the gravity of a 5-year-old given a real question. Today it says, Hi Mommy, she decided. Because she's reading from the hospital window. He didn't correct her. He didn't talk about angles of view or how St. Catherine's faced inland. He let the day be kind. After lunch, when Lila's eyelids started to droop in the way children's do, slow, valiant, inevitable, Mason led her to the small lounge off his office and dimmed the lights. He folded his suit jacket into a square and made a pillow of it on the couch. Rest, he said. You did a lot today. I'm not tired, she said, eyes already half closed. Of course not, he agreed. She slid sideways, the badge lanyard turning into a ribbon across her collarbone, and was asleep before the second hand finished a lap. Mason stood a long time in the doorway, the way you stand in a museum before a painting you can't explain to anyone. He went back to his desk, finally behind it, opened a blank document, and wrote 3 lines that would become policy by afternoon. Immediate paid medical leave for hourly staff with ER admission, no penalties. Hardship fund, same-day microgrants for rent, food, meds. Night shift dignity review, Omar to lead, CEO to attend. He hit send to legal with the subject, draft today. No adverbs. Then he opened his calendar and carved a rectangle out of the week, St. Catherine's, visit. He wasn't sure yet when. He only knew he would go. On the couch, Lila exhaled a sound halfway between a sigh and a whistle. The visitor badge shifted with her breath. On his desk, his phone lit up with a text from an unknown number, this is June. Bless you. Carmen is crying because of your note, but the good kind. She says tell Lila she's proud. Mason thumbed back, tell her Lila is safe. Tell her the corners are covered. He didn't notice he was smiling until the glass caught him at the wrong angle and handed the expression back. It looked unfamiliar and, for the first time in a long time, right. By the time Lila woke, disoriented, then reassured by the jacket pillow and the ferry outside, the courier had delivered their note. Raina had texted a photo of an observation nurse holding 2 juice boxes like trophies, and Omar had emailed a list of edges we always forget. Did Mommy get it? Lila asked, rubbing her eyes with the back of her hand. She did, Mason said. And she sent a message, she's proud of you. Lila's mouth made a small O that might have been a laugh or might have been a sob. She chose laugh. We did good circles, she said, nodding toward the desk as if that had been the day's hinge. We did, Mason said. He glanced at the place where the water glass had left no trace, where the sun now made a perfect rectangle across the walnut. We really did. He didn't know it yet, but those circles, the literal ones, the policy ones, the ones made by a ferry in blue water, had already started to widen. They would touch a hospital room, a night shift, a board table, a life he'd calibrated too finely to let anything human in. For now, it was enough to watch a 5-year-old put her badge back over her head like a crown and ask, politely, if they could write another note. St. Catherine's had that particular hospital quiet, the kind made of beeps and shoe squeaks and sentences spoken just below certainty. Carmen Alvarez lay propped at a tilt in observation 5, an oxygen cannula resting like a question mark beneath her nose. The room was clean and undecorated except for a watercolor print of a coastline that looked like it belonged to someone else's life. Her chest hurt, not like a punch, but like an argument. Every breath tugged a little. A nurse had used words, viral pneumonia, dehydration, low O2 sats, that sounded technical enough to keep fear respectful. Painkillers dulled the edges. The center stayed. June sat by the window in a vinyl chair that made a tiny sigh every time she shifted. She'd arrived with a tote bag full of practical mercy, phone charger, lip balm, a pair of socks that didn't pinch, and a folded note from Lila with the letters leaning bravely against one another. June had a high school secretary's efficiency and a grandmother's patience. She kept answering the same 3 questions as many times as they were asked. Lila? Carmen asked again, because the question wouldn't be done with her. She's safe, June said, for the 5th time without a hint of annoyance. With your boss. The fancy one. He sent a note. There's apple juice involved. My boss. Carmen's eyes were glassy with medication, but her skepticism cut through. She had met the CEO once, in a photograph on the cover of a magazine in somebody else's dentist office. Too handsome in that expensive, careful way. Men like that did not exist in rooms like this. June pulled an envelope from her tote and handed it over. From him. Carmen unfolded the paper with clumsy fingers. The words were printed in block letters, big enough to be a kindness. Carmen, we've got you covered. Do not worry about work. Rest. Your daughter is safe and being spoiled. M. Kincaid. Below it, a heart, valiant and lopsided, and the sentence that undid her, I love you mommy underlined 3 times. The tears came without her permission. June stood and found the useless hospital tissue box and then, because she knew better, left to hunt a washcloth instead. Carmen pressed the note to her sternum like a compress. Paid leave, she whispered to the ceiling when June stepped out. Who gets that? Her mind, fogged as it was, still tried to do math. Rent due in 10 days. A past due electric bill she hadn't told Lila about. The copay she could maybe put on a card with room left. She had lived so long on the cliff edge between enough and not that even the word rest felt like a trick. The monitor beeped at a steady rate. She decided to believe it. A new nurse came in with 2 juice boxes held up like tiny trophies. Message from upstairs, she said with a conspiratorial smile, tapping the note. From your employer. She drew out the word as if it were a plot twist. Says to tell you you're on paid medical leave. And to drink. Drink what? Carmen asked, and the nurse squeezed one of the boxes until the straw popped out. Apple juice, the nurse said. Apparently that's company policy today. Carmen laughed, a small sound that tugged at the wrong muscles. I don't understand any of this. You don't have to yet, the nurse said, pressing the straw into the foil seal with a bright, satisfying puncture. You just have to breathe. In. Out. Like it's your whole job. She checked the O2 number on the monitor, made a pleased noise, and slipped away with professional invisibility. When June returned, she set the warm washcloth in Carmen's hands and sat again. He texted me, she said, as if announcing the weather. The CEO. Very polite. Gave me his direct number and everything. I saved it under, Mason, money person. June, Carmen said, her voice embarrassingly small. I'm so tired. I know, June said, and placed a hand on Carmen's arm. You've been tired for 5 years, chicken. It's time somebody else carries something. Carmen closed her eyes and let the washcloth cool. Memory got in while her guard was down. The oldest trick it knew. A different bed. A different ceiling. The tiny studio on Vashon where she had dreamed herself into software. Textbooks stacked like architecture on the floor. The smell of cheap coffee, the freedom of keys under her fingers. She had loved code because it was a promise: if you did the logic right, the thing worked. No one could argue with a function that returned what it was supposed to. Then Evan with his laugh that bent rules and his hands that felt like negation of gravity. He'd held her face in his hands and said forever like a word that didn't break. When the test turned positive, she had shown him 2 blue lines and the happiest sort of terror. He had said he needed air. 3 days later he texted a sentence that rerouted her life: I can't be this person. He wasn't. Her parents, practical to the point of cruelty when frightened, had not handled it better. You were going to be someone, her father had said, to the window, as if arguing with a ghost. Her mother had cried into dish towels and said the worst thing loving people say: you can still fix this. Carmen had already heard a heartbeat. She chose the smaller person in the room. She chose and then paid for the choosing. Odd jobs followed like weather. A year of couches and calendars. She learned the geography of other people's kitchens. The janitorial job at Kincaid Enterprises had not been a fall so much as a foothold. The hours were honest, the benefits didn't vanish if you blinked, and nobody cared what she used to be. She could tuck Lila into bed, slip out under June's watch, and make floors shine. It was a plan. Not forever, but not a cliff either. By the time the sun rinsed the glass of Kincaid Tower the next morning, a new routine had already begun to assemble itself around a 5-year-old with a visitor badge. Mason arrived early, earlier than his assistant, earlier than the espresso machine's warm-up cycle, and found Lila sitting cross-legged on the office couch, the CEO's jacket folded under her like a raft. She had a handful of crayons, a hotel notepad Reina had scrounged from security, and the quiet concentration of someone on assignment. "What are we building?" he asked, dropping his briefcase softer than was his habit. "A picture for Mommy," she said without looking up. "Miss June says the nurse will put it on the wall if it's brave." "What does a brave picture look like?" She held it up. In crayon blocks, she'd drawn 3 rectangles, tall, taller, tallest, under a blue stripe of sky. One tower had a giant K. In the corner, a fairy trailed AV of white. At the bottom, stick figures, a small one with yellow hair and a badge the size of a watermelon, a tall one with square shoulders, and between them a heart so big it made their arms curve. He felt the ridiculous sting behind his eyes and blinked it away. "It looks exactly right," he said. His phone buzzed on the desk, a text from June. Carmen slept. "O2 improving. She keeps touching your note like it's a button that makes air." Mason typed back without thinking too much about syntax. "Tell her we'll bring the original art today." He had a list on his screen before 8, review the hardship fund draft, plain English, no adverbs, approval in hours not weeks, finalize paid emergency leave memo, schedule a night shift walkthrough with facilities, send a courier to St. Catherine's with the drawing and a bag that had become, in his mind, standard equipment, socks, charger, lotion, juice. Reina appeared in the doorway at 8:01 with an update and a wry smile. Concierge retrained. Turnstile cameras reviewed. Verdict: you can't plan for tiny, determined humans who draft off groups like cyclists. We'll add a Little Eyes protocol, staff trained to notice kids following badges. Without making the lobby feel like TSA. "Good," Mason said. "And for the record, the tiny, determined human stays as long as she needs." Reina's expression softened toward Lila. "I made you a real badge," she said, producing a laminated rectangle on a bright yellow lanyard. "Visitor, Lila," in letters that took up most of the card. Lila slipped it over her head with ceremonial care and sat a little taller. Omar came up from 32 with a clipboard that smelled faintly of lemon and floor wax. "Edges we forget," he said, handing over a 1-page list with bullet points that had the moral clarity of a sermon: under desk lips, elevator call buttons, mop sink backsplashes, break room refrigerator handles, wipe the underside, not just the face. Mason scanned it like scripture. "You're leading our night shift audit," he said. "Put whoever you want in the room. I'll be there. We'll pay time and a half for workshop hours." Omar blinked. "Sir. We make the big thing better by fixing the little things," Mason said, as if quoting someone wiser. "I stole that line." Omar's eyes went to Lila, who was now carefully rounding the corners of her drawing so the nurse wouldn't get poked. "Good source," he said. They took the long way to the cafe at 10. Mason matched his stride to Lila's stop-start pace, which meant pausing to admire a lobby sculpture she declared a robot trying to hug, waving at the barista who produced a perfect half-hot cocoa without being asked, and answering a facilities text shy, "Is that," with, "Yes. This is Lila. She's with me." Heads turned the way heads do when a scene doesn't compute, the suit with the ponytail of power walking beside a child in an oversized uniform, sharing a pastry and a low-voiced joke. Phones appeared because phones always do. One photo made it to an internal Slack channel with a caption that had meant to be sweet, "When the boss has a soft side." By noon, a cousin of the marketing intern had reposted it to Instagram with a looser caption and a wider audience, "Kincaid's Mystery Kid?" Mason didn't see it, yet. He was in HR's conference room with a red pen, carving the legalese out of a policy draft so that someone on 2 hours of sleep could read it without a dictionary. "If you go to the emergency room," he wrote over a paragraph that had tried to be immortal, "you won't be punished. We will pay you while you get well. Call this number." That's it. He sent the memo to legal with the subject line "Ship by 3 p.m." and a postscript that made the general counsel groan even as he smiled, "Plain language only. If a sentence needs a footnote, we failed." At lunch, he and Lila sat on the window bench again with sandwiches he had constructed like blueprints. She ate hers into a knowledgeably perfect crescent and then arranged the pickle slices by diameter. "Do you always eat here?" she asked, eyes on the water. "Usually I eat standing up, reading things that aren't about food," he admitted. "Turns out that's not as good. You should sit," she advised gravely. "Or your legs will forget." He sat. After, they FaceTimed June from the office, and June turned the camera toward a woman propped against hospital pillows with a cannula that no longer looked like news. Carmen's voice came small and steady through the speaker. "Hey, baby. Mommy." Lila held up the drawing so close the screen turned into a blur of crayon. "Miss June says the nurse will put it on the wall if it's brave." "Is it brave?" "It's the bravest thing in this room," Carmen said, laughing, and then pressed her lips together because laughing still tugged at the wrong parts. "Are you good?" "I have a badge," Lila said, solemn, panning down so her mother could see the yellow lanyard. "And I'm teaching Mr. Mason about circles." Carmen's eyes flicked, for the first time, to the man framed politely at the edge of the picture. He looked different at phone camera distance, less polished, more human, a smudge of peanut butter betraying him at the cuff. "Thank you," she said to him, the 2 words threadbare in her mouth from overuse and still the best she had. "You'll need less of those from me and more from the universe soon," he said, which wasn't a line he prepared but landed right anyway. "Rest. We'll courier the art." June took the phone back with a wink. "She's bossy again," she mouthed, which meant the medicine and the oxygen were doing their jobs. They were back at the elevator bank when Raina intercepted, tablet in hand, the security equivalent of a weather map on her screen. "We've got a gentleman downstairs asking for access," she said, the way professionals call a storm a low-pressure system. "Claims to be Lila's father. No ID that matches. He got loud with concierge. He knows your name." Mason's stomach did a small, unpleasant pivot. "Name? Daniel Carter." Even with the last names changed by life and lawyers, Carmen's intake paperwork had included an emergency contact crossed out hard enough to indent the page. "Old stories have a way of knocking. Keep him in the lobby," Mason said. "Do not escalate. If he wants to talk about custody or access, he can do that with counsel. Offer him coffee and the public restroom, nothing else. Raina nodded. Already sent the "we value your patience" speech. He asked about arrangements. Of course he did, Mason said quietly. They took a side corridor to avoid the main atrium. Lila, sensing nothing but the quiet shift in adult air, hummed under her breath and matched her steps to the pattern in the carpet, square, square, line, square, square, line, like a game. Downstairs, Daniel Carter was the kind of handsome that ages badly, a smirk where a smile should be, a confidence that reads as debt when the light changes. He leaned on the concierge desk like he'd earned it and waved his hands in a way that dared someone to stop him. "I'm here for my kid," he told anyone with a tie. "And to see the man who thinks he can buy a family." Raina stepped between him and the turnstiles, an island in flat shoes. "This is a private building. If you have business here, schedule it. If you have a legal claim, file it. If you keep raising your voice, you'll be outside." He snorted. "Tell Kincaid he can either talk to me today or read about it tomorrow." He pocketed a business card that wasn't a business card at all, just the names of 2 tabloids in jagged type, and strutted to the revolving door with the swagger of a man convinced the world still wanted his entrance. Raina watched him exit, made 3 notes on her tablet, and sent a 1-line text to Mason, "Weather moved east. Might rain later." Upstairs, the marketing intern's Instagram post metastasized. Someone added a caption that was almost kind and almost cruel, "From janitor's closet to corner office." By late afternoon, Mason's assistant, Ellie, slid into his office with her laptop open to a Google alert she wished she could unsee. But before the bad news, she delivered the good in the voice she saved for real things. "The courier's back." The nurse sent a picture. She turned the screen. Carmen's hospital wall now had 2 anchors, a hydrangea cloud catching the window strip of sun, and Lila's drawing taped at eye level, "Brave." "Thank you," Mason said, the word smaller than what he meant. He pivoted to Ellie's second tab, glanced at the post, watched his own face lean, for a breath, into the unkind angle of rumor, and made a decision. "Schedule a board call," he said. "Tonight or first thing. Put policy and people on the agenda. I'll drive it." Ellie's eyebrows did a jump she rarely let free. "Under other business, or top line," he said. "Also, prep comms with 2 statements, one internal about the policies we ship today, one external that says nothing about my private life and everything about how we treat the people who keep our lights on." "Copy," Ellie said, fingers already flying. She paused at the door. "You want the CFO for the call? Invite everyone who counts," he said. "And 2 who don't think they do." At 5, the paid emergency leave memo went out to every hourly employee in 3 languages with a hotline number that rang to a desk staffed by a human, not a tree of options. The hardship fund form, a single page that asked for what mattered and nothing else, went live with a promise of a decision by end of day. Omar's "Edges We Forget" list became the backbone of a dignity audit that would pay overtime to anyone who showed up to tell the truth. These were small things by market standards. By human ones, they were architecture. At 6:30, June texted a photo of Carmen asleep with one hand resting on the slope of the blanket where the drawing lay beneath like a second skin. Mason put his phone face down and let himself feel the relief like a warm tide at his ankles. At 7, Raina pinged, "Your lobby friend posted a selfie, big news coming about Kincaid and Company." Mason sent the screenshot to legal with a subject line that had teeth. "Monitor, don't poke." Then he CC'd a family law attorney he trusted and wrote 2 words, "Heads up." At 8, the board's faces tiled across his monitor, squares of concern, curiosity, calculation. A few had the look of people who'd already read the wrong version of a story. The chair, a woman who had pulled 3 companies through fires without losing her core, cleared her throat. "Before we begin, is there anything we should know about optics?" "Yes," Mason said, and the word landed in the big room calm. "But you'll hear about people first." He walked them through the policies they'd shipped, the numbers that made doing the right thing look like good business because it was. He talked about retention, about the cost of churn, about what happens to quality when the people who clean the corners know the corners count. Only then did he speak the part that would cost him less than he'd imagined and buy him more than he'd hoped. "There is a child," he said. "Her name is Lila. Her mother, Carmen Alvarez, works nights in our building and is in the hospital recovering from pneumonia. Lila came here yesterday because she was afraid her mother would lose her job. She didn't. Not on my watch." That's the story. A board member with a fondness for optics shifted in his square. "And the photo?" "A moment of humanity in a place that needs more of it," Mason said. "We can chase it or we can earn it." The chair held his gaze for a beat, then nodded once, decisively. "Fine. Ship the policies, send me the data, and if anyone wants to fight about the memo, they can do it after we figure out what night shift dignity means in practice." The meeting ended without fireworks. Rumors don't like oxygen, they feed on attention. Still, Mason knew storms don't pass because you pronounce them over. You build shelters. You anchor the tent lines. You keep the fire dry. At 9, he found Lila asleep again on the couch, visitor badge askew, her drawing hand smudged faintly blue. He moved the badge so it wouldn't press against her neck, pulled a thin throw over her shoulders, and sat in the doorway for a while with the lights low, listening to the quiet mechanical heart of a building he had run for a decade and was only now beginning to know. On his desk, his calendar blinked a new tile into place: emergency board session, 8 a.m., if needed. In his inbox, 2 emails waited, one from legal with a 3-sentence plan if Daniel escalated, one from Ellie with a draft internal post that did not read like PR. He stood, walked to the window, and watched the last ferry of the night pull a white line through black water like handwriting you could read from space if you knew what it said. He didn't say it out loud, because promises like this are better kept than spoken, but it shaped itself all the same: no one will make this child earn her place. Not here. Not anywhere I sign the checks. Downstairs, a man with a smirk told a bartender he had a story. Across town, a woman in an observation bed exhaled without coughing for the first time in a week. In the quiet office, a girl with a badge slept with a crayon still in her fist. Morning would come with noise. For tonight, the small things held hands. By mid-morning, the story had grown legs. A grainy photo, Mason in shirt sleeves, a little girl in an oversized uniform, the skyline beyond, had jumped from an intern's cousin's Instagram to a gossip site that specialized in turning kindness into scandal. The headline was a shrug and a sneer: "Billionaire CEO's secret child." Or "Office romance gone awry." It wasn't accurate. It didn't need to be. Ellie slid the printout across Mason's desk and spoke without flinch. "Comms has 2 drafts. The short one says nothing. The real one says what we're doing for hourly teams and refuses to feed the rumor mill. Ship the real one internally," Mason said. "And tell comms to ignore bait. We don't litigate our values in tabloids." He pushed back from the desk and looked toward the couch. Lila was kneeling over a second drawing, tongue peeking at the corner of her mouth, the badge lanyard a bright slash against navy cloth. "Field trip?" he asked. "Hospital delivery, then grilled cheese." Her head popped up. "With crispy sides?" "The good way," he said. He texted Reina and Omar, "Gone to St. Catherine's with L. Ping if lobby weather changes." Then he sent a final note to legal: "If Daniel Carter files anything, we want to be in front of it, not under it. Retain Hart and Levin. They do family law like it's triage." The reply came back in 1 minute with 2 words: "Already done." They took the service elevator to avoid the main atrium. Reina met them in the garage with the kind of plain sedan that didn't attract attention and a glance at the rearview mirror that said she'd spotted every tail within 6 blocks. "Hospital's been alerted," she said. "Their security will meet us at the floor." Lila fell asleep almost instantly, head tipped sideways, crayon still in her fist. Mason watched the city unspool and felt strangely calm, the sort of calm that comes when the hard choice has been made and all that's left is the work. Carmen looked better when they arrived. Color had returned to her face, her breaths no longer punctuated by echoes. The oxygen cannula was still in place, but her eyes were clearer, and the nurse had moved the hydrangeas to catch more sun. Lila ran ahead and stopped just short of the bed, as if some internal break reminded her hospital rooms are for gentleness. "Mommy, look," she said, presenting the second masterpiece, 3 stick figures again, but now the small one had a crown of yellow scribble, and above their heads, in careful block letters, "We are brave." Carmen laughed and cried in the same breath. "We are," she said, touching the crown with a finger. "Especially you." Mason hung back near the window, toad in hand. "Hot tip from the night shift union," he said lightly. "The socks without seams are better than the ones with. Also, real lotion." Carmen looked at him for a long beat over the rim of the drawing. Humor was a bridge, yes. But there was something else in her look, relief she didn't have to pay for, suspicion that it might be a loan anyway, and gratitude worn thin by overuse. "Thank you," she said again, and meant it more now that she could breathe. "Your neighbor tells me you don't sit still well," Mason said. "So I brought something to make stillness feel like movement." He pulled a slim company-issued laptop from the tote, slid it onto the tray table, and opened it to a clean screen. "We're rebuilding the maintenance reporting app. I can have 10 MBAs stare at it and they'll give me bells and whistles. Or I can ask the person who used it at 2 in the morning while a mop was balanced on her shoulder. Which one do you think will make the thing work?" Carmen blinked. The oxygen hissed softly. "I haven't written a line of code in years," she said, voice low. "But I can tell you why the current flow makes people lie to it." "Perfect," Mason said. "Start there." She tapped the trackpad like a muscle memory waking up and drew a rectangle with her finger in the air, composing out loud. "Don't bury the urgent flag 3 screens down. Make it a red button at top. 2 choices when someone opens the app at night, log an issue or emergency now. No jargon. No drop-downs with 30 options that don't describe what's actually happening. A picture upload on the first screen. People won't type with gloves on." Mason typed as she spoke, not because he needed the notes, he'd have Ellie record it later, but because honoring someone's expertise sometimes looks like taking dictation. Lila climbed onto the chair and watched the cursor move like a small animal crossing snow. Carmen paused, embarrassed and exhilarated. "I shouldn't, this isn't my job." "It might be," Mason said. "When you're well. If you want it." Before she could reply, a knock at the door turned the air. A hospital security officer stepped in, a second shape behind him. Daniel Carter had the jittery energy of a man who had mistaken attention for oxygen his whole life. He stopped when he saw Lila, surprise softening his jaw for a heartbeat, then shifted gears without shame. "There she is," he said brightly, as if he'd arrived on time for a recital. "Pumpkin. Daddy's here." Lila went very still. Children remember cadence more than content. She remembered that voice. "Out," Mason said to the air, and hospital security moved like a door closing. "I have rights," Daniel said, slipping into indignation like a suit jacket. "I'm her father. You think you can buy? You have the right to file for visitation in the county where you live," Mason said, voice low and even. "You also have the right to counsel. You do not have the right to enter a medical ward uninvited, frighten a patient, or remove a minor from a secure floor. If you continue in this tone, you'll have the right to remain silent." Daniel's smirk flickered toward mean. "You're real brave with guards and a checkbook." Carmen's hand shook against the blanket. "Please leave," she said, barely above a whisper, but Steele had found the line of it. "You haven't earned this room." "Earned?" Daniel spit. "You mean like she earned a billionaire babysitter?" He flicked his chin at Mason. "What's this, your redemption arc?" Raina filled the doorway like a fact. "Sir," she said to Daniel, "professional and final, you need to go." Daniel laughed like a man performing for a different audience. "This isn't over." "It is for today," Raina said. She escorted him and the officer back into the hall. Mason heard the lowered voices of two professionals doing a delicate job. Then the door clicked shut. The room exhaled. "I'm so sorry," Carmen said, both hands covering her face now, words muffled. "I didn't, he." "You don't apologize for someone else's choices," Mason said. "Not in my building, not in this hospital." Lila slid off the chair and tucked herself into the crook of Carmen's arm, drawing careful not to crumple. "Do we still get grilled cheese?" she asked, "because 5-year-olds are anchors." "We do," Mason said, grateful for the ordinary task. "And then I'm calling my attorney to make sure the next time that man wants to see either of you, it happens in front of a judge with a calendar." Carmen let out a sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob. "I can't afford." "You can't afford not to," Mason said. "And you won't be paying for it." "I will. Through a fund the company set up this morning for employees navigating legal and medical crises." He watched her flinch at the word "I" and corrected himself in a way that mattered. "We will. The company will. The policy is written." Back at the office, Ellie had turned the internal memo into a town hall invitation. The subject line read like a thesis: "How we show up for each other, emergency leave, hardship fund, night shift dignity." At 2 p.m., conference rooms on every floor filled with associates, analysts, receptionists, baristas, and people in navy uniforms who usually entered rooms after everyone had left them. Mason stood on the atrium balcony, a handheld mic against a chest that had learned to project. His prepared talking points lay face down on a high table. He spoke from the messy center instead. "When I was 29, he began, I thought leading a company meant getting very good at moving very large things. This week, a 5-year-old taught me that big things are just a lot of little things holding hands." There were smiles in places the camera usually didn't pan. He continued. "Effective immediately, if you or a family member ends up in the emergency room, you will not lose your income while you recover. We will pay you. If you are choosing between rent and medication, we have an emergency fund that answers in hours, not weeks. And at night, when most of us are gone, the people who keep this place clean and safe will have tools that work. We will ask them how to build those tools. We will listen." A hand went up in the front row, a man from the mailroom whose laugh could be heard over the pits. "What about the gossip?" he asked bluntly. "People say things." "People do," Mason said. "They will. The company won't." He raised his eyes to the mezzanine where the facilities crew had gathered in their break between floors. "We're not going to comment on employees' private lives. We are going to defend their dignity and their jobs. If you came here today for scandal, all I can offer is policy." It landed. Not with applause, the room wasn't that kind of room, but with a collective shift towards something like trust. You can feel that in buildings if you've been there long enough. When the town hall ended, Mason returned to his office to find a voicemail from Hart and Levin that sounded like the legal version of a blanket: "We've reviewed preliminary filings. Mr. Carter's history does not help him. We can petition for a protective order covering mother and child, and we recommend doing so today." He called back, authorized everything, and sent Ellie the retainer to process through the fund so Carmen would never see a bill with his name on it. Late afternoon light turned the sound into hammered metal. Lila set up a picnic of crackers and sliced apples on the window bench and declared it tea. Mason took a call from Omar on speaker so she could hear his voice too. "You should have seen the night crew," Omar said, exhausted and elated. "You put their names on the memo. No one does that. They do now." "Tell them it's a first draft," Mason said. "The good kind, the kind that invites red ink." "I will," Omar said. "Also, small thing, the mops sink on 31 leaks behind the line. Been taped for months. It's an edge. I want it replaced. Replace it, Mason said. And bill it to the line item that says, "Stop pretending little things are free." Omar laughed. Copy that. Dusk finally pushed the day into its next shape. Raina texted a last weather report, lobby clear. Daniel hasn't been back. Hospital put a note on the chart, no visitors not on list. June sent a photo of Carmen asleep again, Lila's second drawing taped beside the first, words "We are brave" catching the glow. Mason watched Lila eat a cracker with the dignity of a queen and felt the bone-deep certainty that had guided him through deals reappear in a new suit, the certainty of choosing people first and letting the markets catch up. He walked to the window with his phone, snapped a photo of the last ferry drawing a white line across the dark water, and typed to Carmen before he could second-guess the softness in it. Fairy handwriting says, "Soon." He hit send, tucked the phone away, and turned back to the room where a 5-year-old was constructing a tiny world out of crackers, apple slices, and trust. Tomorrow would bring filings and counters, headlines and half-truths. Tonight brought a blanket, a couch, a visitor badge coiled carefully on the table like a snake sleeping, and the quiet of a building learning a new rhythm. The little things were holding hands. And for the first time in a long time, Mason realized he was one of them. The hearing took less than 20 minutes. In courtroom 3B, where the ceiling fans clicked like impatient metronomes, Hart and Levin set their file on the table with the quiet confidence of people who knew the terrain. Mason sat a row back, tie straight, hands folded. He wasn't there as a headline. He was there as ballast. Daniel arrived late, a half-buttoned swagger that wilted under fluorescent lights. His lawyer whispered fast, the judge didn't. Protective orders are not poetry. They're sentences that carry weight. Ms. Alvarez has been the sole caregiver for 5 years, the judge said, eyes moving from the petition to the woman in the second row with the clear oxygen cannula marks fading on her cheeks. Mr. Carter, your record shows no support, no contact, and a history that does not help you in this courtroom. Temporary protective order is granted. Any future contact will be supervised and scheduled by the court. Do not appear at her home, her workplace, or the minor child's school. Violate this, and the penalties will be immediate. Daniel opened his mouth, thought better of it, and closed it again. He signed where told. Outside, he tried for a smirk in the hallway that found no audience. Storms that feed on rumor die in rooms with stenographers. By afternoon, St. Catherine's discharged Carmen with an inhaler, a follow-up appointment, and a nurse who hugged her a little too long. June wheeled her to the curb, a tote of wrong groceries, on her lap, seamless socks, real lotion, a paperback with its spine already softened by hands. The sedan from Kincaid Tower idled at the curb. Raina held the door. Lila vibrated in the back seat like a bird trying not to fly. The apartment smelled like lemon cleaner and something warm from the oven. Mason had arrived an hour early with takeout that pretended to be home-cooked and a new air filter June had recommended. On the tiny kitchen table, Lila had arranged her masterpieces under magnets that had once held overdue bills, "We are brave." Beside them, in a child's careful capitals, another sign, "No more brave alone." Carmen stood in the doorway and put a hand to her mouth. Not because it was glamorous, it wasn't. Because it was safe. An extra set of towels in the bathroom. A folded fleece on the couch. A note on the counter in Mason's neat print, "There is nothing to earn tonight. Just breathe." June made a small, satisfied sound as if checking an item off a list no one else could see. She winked at Lila. "I'm stealing 2 cookies and your mother's laundry basket," she announced, and left them to their small, necessary ceremony. They ate grilled cheese the good way at the coffee table, edges crisp, middles molten, while the city traded its daylight for neon. Lila narrated each bite like commentary for an invisible audience. "This corner is the captain. The captain says we can have ketchup because it's a party." Carmen laughed and then managed not to cough afterward. That alone felt like a miracle with the volume turned down. When Lila was finally asleep in her small bed, visitor badge coiled on the nightstand like a sleeping snake, Carmen and Mason sat at the table with the sort of quiet that belongs to people who have both run out of adrenaline and found something to replace it. "I don't know how to do this part," Carmen said, fingers tracing the edge of the "No More Brave Alone" sign. "Letting someone help. Without tallying it in the back of my head like a debt." "Then don't keep a ledger," Mason said. "Keep a calendar. There will be a day when it's me who needs the help. We can make that ordinary." She studied him over the rim of a chipped mug. The rumor sites would ask for a story with sharper edges, life rarely delivered one on demand. This felt steadier than romance. It felt like grown-ups at a small table deciding on purpose. "About the once," he said, gentler. "If you want to pick up the thread." She nodded. "I do. A beat. I didn't stop being that person. I just got busy surviving." "Then let's make surviving the preface," he said. "Not the whole book." The weeks that followed were a study in small, right things. Comms shipped the policy memo company-wide. Not glossy, not triumphant, just clear: emergency leave is paid. The hardship fund answers in hours. Night shift dignity isn't a slogan, it's a budget line. Local business press picked it up, perhaps because it was different, perhaps because the story everyone had expected to chase turned out to be less interesting than work done well. Omar ran the night audits like a conductor. The list of edges we forget grew and then shrank as parts were replaced, processes trimmed, and burdens shifted from people to systems. A leaking mop sink was swapped out before lunch. Elevator call buttons got a cleaning schedule with names and times. Break room refrigerators were wiped under the handles, not just the face. Small wins stacked. Morale did, too. Carmen returned to the building not in a navy uniform but in a clean blouse and flats that didn't pinch, a consultant badge clipped to her collar. The first meeting felt like walking into a room she'd been locked out of and realizing the key had been in her pocket the whole time. "Don't start with the dashboard," she told the developers, pointing at the old maintenance app that looked like it had been designed by committee and fear. "Start with the person who is cold, wet, and tired at 2 a.m., trying to tell you what's broken while holding a mop. If the first screen can't be used one-handed, it's wrong." They listened. Not because she had a title, she didn't, not yet, but because she didn't waste their time with jargon. She sketched flows on a whiteboard with the same confidence she'd once used to map bus routes. They sent prototypes to the night crew. The night crew sent back notes with the comic timing of people who had been waiting 5 years to be asked. Mason sat in the back of those sessions with his pen still and his mouth shut. Leadership, he was learning, sometimes meant choosing the chair against the wall and letting better voices anchor the room. One evening, after an hour of testing with a custodian named Ravi who could MacGyver an elevator with 3 zip ties and a prayer, Carmen and Ellie stood shoulder to shoulder comparing notes. "You know, this is the part where someone gives you a title," Ellie said without looking up. Carmen laughed, startled. "What would it even be?" "Something boring that hides the fact you run the room," Ellie said. "Product specialist, ops tech. Principal, facilities systems. We'll make the card say something normal so the work can be radical." A week later, HR slid an offer letter across a table that once held investment decks. Base salary. Benefits. A line item for continuing education. A childcare stipend that made Carmen close her eyes for a second, then sign. "Welcome," Ellie said, meaning it. The app shipped on a Thursday at 2 a.m. because that's when the people who needed it most were awake. By 2:15, the first emergency flag came through, a burst pipe in a stairwell, photographed one-handed with a gloved thumb in the corner. The response triaged in minutes, not hours. Water that would have ruined a floor drained into a containment the crew had set up because the app had told them where the shut-off valve actually was. The night shift applauded in a quiet, tired way that felt like church. Mason didn't send a press release. Omar did send a group text at 3:04 a.m., "It works." Carmen stared at the screen in the dark of her apartment, Lila breathing steady in the next room, and let the words fill the space rumors used to rent for free. In daylight, the company held a small ceremony that wasn't really a ceremony in the atrium. No stage. No ticker. Just folding tables, pyro-free balloon clusters, and a grill station turning out the good grilled cheese while facilities rolled their eyes and got seconds. Reina raised a paper cup and said, "To edges," and the applause came from people who knew exactly what she meant. Speech, someone called to Mason, because someone always does. He shook his head and nodded toward the back where Carmen stood half hidden behind a potted tree, as if she weren't the gravity holding the moment together. "You don't need my voice," he said. "You need hers." Carmen didn't step forward. She didn't have to. She just lifted her cup and said, "Thanks for listening," and the roar that answered her was bigger than the room. After, Lila tugged Mason's sleeve and led him to a corner of the atrium where a volunteer photo booth had been set up, a cheap backdrop, a box of props, a printer that spit out warm pictures still smelling faintly of dye. Lila put a paper crown on her head, handed Mason a cardboard wrench, and beckoned Carmen into the frame between them. "Center," Mason told the volunteer, grinning. "Where she belongs." The printer hummed and slid out an image that had nothing to do with optics, a 5-year-old with a crayon smear on her cheek, a woman with a new badge and the old steadiness in her eyes, and a man who looked less like a magazine cover and more like a person you could call when the sink broke. They taped the picture on Mason's office wall beside the fairy photograph he'd taken the week the world pivoted. The white wake looked like handwriting again, but if you'd asked any of them what it said now, they would have given the same answer: home. That night, on the rooftop terrace no one used enough, the three of them ate takeout under string lights that made even takeout feel like an occasion. The city glowed, a map of choices. "Do you remember the first day?" Lila asked, feet swinging from her chair, voice pitched to the particular wonder only children keep. "When I wore the big uniform and did circles wrong." "I remember," Mason said. "You did the important part right." "What was that?" she asked. "You showed up," he said. "And you told the truth." Carmen looked at him over the rim of her cup. "So did you." They didn't talk about forever. They didn't need to name it to make it real. Lila reached across the table and put one small hand in each of theirs like she was closing a circuit. "Teams," she said, satisfied, and went back to her fries. Later, when the elevator hummed them back down to ordinary life, Mason stopped by his office, flicked on the lamp, and stood in front of the wall. The fairy. The policy memo. The photo booth print. Lila's brave drawings from the hospital. A corridor of paper that told the story better than any article ever would. He remembered the first line like a dare from another life: "Mom's sick, so I came instead." He'd thought it was the opening to a rescue story. He'd been wrong. It was an invitation. To lead differently. To love without ledger. To let little things hold hands until they became a big thing that didn't need headlines to exist. Down the hall, someone vacuumed the edge of a carpet most people never looked at. On the glass, the last fairy of the night drew its white line across the dark water. He could almost read it now. And that's how one little girl, with nothing but courage in her heart, walked into a CEO's office and forever changed not just her mother's life, but his as well. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths, and sometimes one act of kindness can rewrite an entire future. If this story touched you, let us know in the comments what part moved you the most. Make sure to give this video a like, share it with a friend who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss another story that will break your heart, and then rebuild it.